and behind the curtain.
This is zoned.
Wizard of Oz. How was your California trip?
It was nice.
What'd you do out there?
So I don't know if you know, I've been working, helping Afghans get to the United States for the past couple of years.
No. I knew you're active in Haiti, but
Yeah, so since I was going to visit them.
excellent. Good for you. Hi, good evening, everyone. We're going to call the meeting to order. I have a notice to read first. This is the November 1st, February 1st meeting of the Community Preservation Committee. The Northborough Community Preservation Committee will hold a public hearing on December 7th, continuing to February 1st, in the Select Board Meeting Room, which is where we are, 63 Main Street, Northborough, for the purpose of reviewing proposals for the 2025 Community Preservation Act funds. The applications are available for review at the website, in the Community Preservation Committee area, or in person at the Planning Department, or in person right here. So thanks for coming. We have a quorum: Todd Hellwig, Jeff Leland, Leslie Harrison, Millie Milton, Sean Durkin, and me. 6 of 9, so we can proceed. So, we're back here to review a new proposal, new application, authored by Lori, sponsored by the Open Space Committee, for the potential of using CPA for the purchase of 432 Whitney Street. And Lori, you want to just kick right in with your presentation?
Speak into that microphone, because they can't hear sometimes, so, at home.
So as I understand it, Lori's going to give us kind of an overview similar to she did for the Select Board last week.
Yes, so it's going to be a slightly faster version than the one I gave the Select Board. So I handed out a PowerPoint presentation. On the cover of the PowerPoint presentation, you'll see a couple of photos of the site. So the dirt road, that is actually the view from Whitney Street. And then the brushy version is as you go into the parcel a little bit further. So of course, for those out there, my name is Laurie Connors, and I am the planning director for the town of Northborough. So the second slide that I wanted to point out shows a picture of 432 Whitney Street. It is an undeveloped parcel. It consists of 23.77 acres of land. It is currently zoned for industrial district, and it is also located, although not entirely, within the Groundwater Protection Overlay District Area 3. That does put some limitations on certain types of development. It is served by public water. Public water goes by the frontage of this parcel. However, the public sewer is not available. It's located approximately 1,000 feet from the site to the east. There are some environmental limitations to the parcel. There is a pretty large wetland system on it. I am unclear about the size of the wetland system, but the map gives you some idea, the map on the next page, of its configuration. There is also a small tributary to the Barefoot Brook, which is located to the southwest corner. And then there are also some steep slopes that go through the parcel. There's like a ridge, and you can see that on the next page as well. So the abutting land uses are warehouse and distribution uses to the east. There is state-owned conservation land to the south. That's owned by the Department of Conservation and Recreation. There are single-family homes, railroad tracks, and the aqueduct to the west and there's farmland to the north. So as you can see, there are quite a bit on the next slide of permanently protected open space to the south and to the east. As I mentioned, there is some land that is owned by the Department of Conservation and Recreation. And then over the line in the town of Berlin is permanently protected open space that is owned by the Conservation Commission in Berlin, or it's privately owned land with a conservation restriction on it. So there's quite a large potential to link the aqueduct on the west to all of these open space resources to the south and to the east. So then if you turn the page again, some information about this pending sale. So right now this property is enrolled in the Chapter 61A program. So that's essentially a program that gives tax breaks to property owners who are willing to keep their land undeveloped for a specific period of time and for a specific purpose. So the Chapter 61A program is for agricultural and horticultural uses. And so not all of the land is enrolled in the program, but if I remember correctly, it's a little bit more than 16 acres, so it's a substantial chunk. So as part of the tax break, there is a lien that is placed on the land, and that gives the town the right of first refusal should the property owner decide to sell the property or also convert the property to some sort of industrial, commercial, or residential use. So we have both of those triggers in this circumstance. Not only is the property owner interested in selling the property, but the new property owner is interested in converting it to industrial use. So on December 5th, we received notification of this intent to sell. And part of that notification, which is in your package, Howland Development Corporation signed a purchase and sale agreement. They want to purchase the property for $1.7 million. They want to construct a 40,000 to 60,000 square foot building, and they want to convert the parcel to commercial, industrial, warehouse, or distribution purposes. And they hope to make use of the abutting trail line, train line, and take advantage of the spur. So the right of first refusal gives the town a period of 120 days from the date that we received the notice of intent to sell. And thankfully, the town administrator was able to negotiate an extension, which gives us to May 20th, 2024, thankfully, so we wouldn't have to have a special town meeting. So what the right of first refusal says is that the town has the ability to match a bona fide offer to purchase, or the town can assign that right to another entity, like a conservation land trust or the state Department of Conservation and Recreation. So there are certain benefits in my mind to the town acting on this right of first refusal. And this was discussed with the board of the select board last Monday, I believe it was. And there were letters that were provided from the planning board, the Conservation Commission, and the Open Space Committee. All of those entities unanimously voted to recommend that the town act on this right. So some of the things that I'd like to call to your attention is that open space connection. So as I mentioned, you have the aqueduct there, and then you have all this permanently protected open space. So this would be a fantastic connection between those specific uses. There would be the potential to construct a informal parking lot, so people could park there and then access the aqueduct. There's also the potential to build more trails on the property itself. As you saw, there is that gravel roadway already, so that provides some good access into the parcel. I did mention the wetland system as well as the stream. So there are some sensitive habitats that are located on the property that are hydrologically connected to Barefoot Brook. It preserves some beautiful views. I have not yet been on the property. We have a site visit planned for next week. But the conservation agent, Vinnie Vignali, has walked the property, and he was remarking about the views from the high point towards Boston. So it would serve as a good buffer between the industrial uses to the east and the single-family homes to the west. A small affordable housing development, so what I was thinking is between 4 to 8 units, could be developed on the property. I understand that the Housing Authority and the NAHC already have projects in the works. So chances are that would be a long-term goal. It's not something that would be done in the short term, but it would be a possibility. Those projects are going to be built out at some point, so maybe 10 years from that down the line, when the stockpile of funds has accrued again, there would be a great opportunity to do a small-scale project here. And the purchase is consistent with the goals and objectives that were articulated in both the 2020 master plan and the open space and recreation plan. So the next slide. Potential funding sources for the acquisition. So if the town were interested in acquiring the land for an undesignated municipal purpose, it could do so through municipal appropriation and overlay, could use ARPA funds, or the town could acquire the land for an open space and recreation or affordable housing purpose. Some sources of funds for that are grants. I did reach out to both the Sudbury Valley trustees and the Department of Conservation and Recreation to see if they were interested in acquiring the property themselves because of its ecological sensitivity. Both of them are very interested. Neither of them said that they could come up with $1.7 million to acquire the property themselves. The Sudbury Valley trustees said that they can do some creative options, like, for example, they can purchase the property on a short-term basis for the town, hold it. That would give the town the opportunity to apply for grants, and then sell it to the town when the town has the resources to buy it. The negative about that is they're going to charge the town interest during that period of time. So then the Department of Conservation and Recreation said that they didn't have the resources to buy the entire property, but they may be willing to pony up a certain amount of money, and the number that was kicked around was $200,000. And they are also interested in holding the conservation restriction for the town. So we have a site visit, as I mentioned, next week, and representatives from the Department of Conservation and Recreation and the Sudbury Valley trustees are going to be accompanying us on that site visit. So the very good sign. The DCR representative told me that she's going to bring this project to her board, and she should be able to have an answer for us by the first week in April, so in advance of the town meeting. So that's encouraging. So if we were interested in using Community Preservation Act funds, of course you folks are.
May I interject
Oh,
one
yeah.
quick question?
Sure.
You said that SVT could hold the property for us while you apply for grants, but there's no reason that we can't apply for grants while we have ownership of the property, or is there some,
There is.
okay,
So the way grants work is that you cannot purchase the property and then apply for
okay.
grants.
All right, so there's
You
incentive
have to apply for the grants and then purchase the property.
Okay,
And it's very cumbersome. So I've done that in the past. I acquired land with the land grant, but it took a solid year. And not too many landowners, and I'm sure not this one, would be willing to sit around for a year. We did ultimately get grant funding, but it took a really long time.
okay, so there's
So-
some incentive to possibly
Yeah.
to,
So a partnership of that type where, you know, if the town were willing to pay the interest for that period of time, and then regardless, the understanding is regardless of whether you get the grant or not, you will buy that property. So it would still have to be, you go to town meeting and you still have to get approval for the acquisition.
okay, thank you.
So, of course, you folks know what you have available to you. Of course, at the last meeting, that you already voted to fully allocate all of the new revenue. So that's the $820,000. We do anticipate that the closing would be in the new fiscal year. So, after July 1, so new revenue would be available for this project. So the Affordable Housing Reserve, of course, we did receive letters from Rick, I'm sure he's gonna speak about it, saying that he doesn't want you to allocate it Affordable Housing Reserve. And there was also an email that I provided to you today from Ray Carlson. The Housing Authority also does not want you to use those funds. And then there's $1,060,000 in change in unreserved funds. And then there's the potential to bond for future years' CPA revenue. So, of course, I asked Tim and Jason, who are far more expert on, you know, how to use those funds, so that they can speak to you and answer any questions that you might have about what the possibilities are.
Great. Hi, Jason. Nice to have you back.
Yeah, thank you.
Why don't you tell us what all these numbers mean,
Okay.
please?
Well,
If I may, I'm new, so it's odd for me to come in here and have such a big ask from a committee and then bring it to town meeting. So the select board had their hearing, and they think that this is an appropriate venue to have this funded. So we talked before I had that meeting. I didn't wanna step on anyone's toes. We wanna make the request. And then, we brought Jason because he just came back to us thankfully, from a financial perspective. But you have a lot of options, the community has a lot of options. But as Laurie mentioned, this does align with a lot of things that you have put out in planning purposes to purchase this. We don't wanna break the CPA, we wanna not have cash starved, and we don't want a lot of debt. So we're looking at a combination of funding opportunities. So that's why Jason's here to help the committee get through those options, whether it's a combination of cash on hand to close for July 1, or thereafter, and then financing some portion of the difference. And if there's a stomach for that, that's great. If not, then I'll obviously have to do this again many more times to find the funding to get it done. But I hope we can partner one way or the other for a large portion of it. The ask is the 1.7. the first hurdle is the legal fees and the testing of the sewer from the administrative fund. So there's two asks, and it's tough for me to be here for 50 days and come in and ask that. So I'm fully aware that it's not, I'm late to the game, and I appreciate the consideration. So I just wanted to at least tell you those few things, and we're here to help the committee any way we can to make a decision. So thank you. Sorry.
No, good. Thank you, Tim. That was a good introduction to this. Well, some exciting things happened since I was gone, so this opportunity came up. So I drafted a memo to you folks that was intended to just display a couple of the scenarios that could be at play for financing the 1.7 million. So we tried to capture what if there were no appetite to incur debt for this purchase, would it be possible? And, you know, with the caveat that we would have to use money in the conservation fund that was put for future open space acquisitions, put there from the CPA for that purpose. We would have to use most of that in addition to the some of the unreserved fund, or some or all of the unreserved fund for the CPA, in addition to reallocating the contribution to the conservation fund that's coming up for future acquisitions. So that option is there. I don't know if there's appetite among the CPC to pursue this and use all these funds up front to do this without debt. And then there's the other option of financing it with debt, and you can finance one point. We do need to come up with, from what I understand, $50,000 up front after the approval of the article. So we would need $50,000 of current money to spend on this, but the remaining could be financed with debt, could be financed for 30 years, and the burden would be relatively low over those 30 years, but that's a long span of time. 2055 is a long time from now. That's what the intent was here. So we're here to also listen to the CPC, see what their thoughts are on this, and I can refine any of these models as ideas move forward.
I'll just, relative to the P&S, we have to match what the buyer and the seller have agreed to in their P&S, so that $50,000 is due under their agreement to sell it privately. The buyer has to pay the $50,000 upon signing the P&S, so we would have to be in lockstep with that. So that's why that.
It's part of the 1.7?
Yeah, it's inclusive of the 1.7.
Okay, thanks. I was just going to ask. I hadn't heard that before, so.
Is that refundable if the deal falls through or unable to?
Well, we're going to be doing due diligence now. We're doing the title and we'll do the soil, and if either one of those are incurable, we wouldn't move forward. There wouldn't be a signing of the P&S. So no is the short answer, but we would never sign that if it was ever going to fall through.
So your question is, we pay that and we go to town meeting and it's not successful, which,
Is
of course.
Yeah, it's a deposit.
Well, we wouldn't be signing a P&S until we had approval for funding at town meeting.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry. Thanks. I thought it was like a,
Yeah, no, I'm sorry. I mean, there's a lot of steps. This is one, if the funding is in hand, we're simultaneously on dual tracks to make sure the title's clear, make sure
Right.
the dirt's clean, and then we get approval at town meeting, then we sign the P&S, give the check for $50,000, then we pick a closing date and pay the rest. And in that window, between town meeting and that closing, we gotta either finance or come up with cash for the difference.
can you comment on the P&S itself, to what extent you or council has reviewed it? Are you confident it's bona fide, so to speak?
Yes, it's confirmed,
Loose ends.
bona fide. We have Catherine Klein from KP Law is working on our closing. Million numbers, Catherine. So we're working on a number of deals with her. So it's to the letter of the law. The thing did frighten me. I came from Grafton, and we had a rail. We had the Grafton up the railroad. When I saw the rail spur possibility, I got nervous because of what I dealt with in Grafton, with the Grafton up the railroad and 3 320,000 gallons of propane in a residential area because it was abutting the rail. So that's what made, got my attention, and then people started asking me questions about my professional experience in Grafton relative to that. And could that happen here? I'm not trying to be an alarmist, but
Sure.
there are preemptions for rail that preempt any, not any at all, but certainly zoning and some conservation. So we worry about those type of uses in heavy industry.
Sure. Well, it's completely consistent with our open space plan, our town plan to, preserve open space and take it away from development, be it residential development or industrial in this case. There's certainly support for that in Northborough, given other growth of industrial buildings and warehouses and so on. So I trust that that aspect of it would have support. It's not the main reason you take away a piece of land, but it's one of them in this case. I want to get some feedback from the perspective of the Open Space Committee, but before I do so, does any member have specific questions for Jason or
2 questions.
Tim?
First, are we at all concerned that if we buy this property for the 1.7, they just move the project across the street to the guy's other property? Do you know what I'm getting at, the open-air landfill that's been the problem all along? And if we just buy this one for 1.7, they just say, okay, now you can buy the other property, and they just put the same thing there.
It could happen.
Okay.
That's an interesting point.
So that was the first question. Second one was, I saw that we're going straight to physical soil testing. Usually we don't do that unless there's a reason something has happened or like a phase 1 has told us there's a reasonably likelihood of a problem. Was there a phase 1 done that's actually said that we?
It's not a DEP site, there's nothing
Okay.
that's ever been built there on record, so the phase 1 is just that, right? Just what was there before.
Yeah.
So we want a perk test too, because if we are going to do housing down the road, we don't have sanitary sewer, we want a perk test, just to see if you can do that, to have all your options available.
Okay.
And another thing is the proximity to the railroad tracks.
Okay.
So that would be another reason, possibly there could be some contamination that came off.
Yeah, we've had terrible luck as a community on this. The White Cliffs and then the senior center, both, I think, were unmitigated disasters, I think. That's, okay, thank you.
We're gonna try and mitigate it.
Mitigate this one?
Pre-mitigate.
I have a question probably for Jason. Do you have an idea if that land were to remain industrial with this proposed development, what type of tax revenue would that generate?
We have that, you have that number with you?
Yeah.
Just roughly, I don't.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I didn't bring that with me.
Yeah. Is it significant, would you say?
I know, whatever's developed there plays a big part in the value, so I'm sorry, I know we ran some.
But do we have any
statistics
idea
on that,
what
but I didn't
standard warehouse space is worth, or?
Yeah, I'll just grab the sheets.
Oh.
It's right on my desk.
I probably have it right here. If you can read this small.
Leaves me out.
Going double, triple glasses?
I'm out.
Yeah, hold on. It's not
I'm gonna grab it.
How's that, please?
It's a race.
Question.
Yeah, I know, that was a late breaking exercise that the assessor helped us with.
Yeah.
I'll wait for Tim to return. I want to come back to your first question.
All right, good.
Yeah.
All right. So, his estimates on value. So this is based on a 40,000 square foot building. The building value is estimated at $4,515,600. So the total assessed value, including the land value and the building value, would be $5,970,900. For a 50,000 square foot building, it would be $6,825,300. For a 60,000 square foot building, it would be $7,679,700. So that's on the cost side. Then the income value, building of 40,000 square feet. The tax amount would be $80,449.62. 50,000 square foot building would be $100,562.02. And a 60,000 square foot building would be $120,674.43.
That answers that question.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
And Lori,
I'm
these,
sure he's printing that out for you, so.
those buildings can fit in here under the zoning? Has that been looked at? Or is it preempted because of this rail issue?
You know, it's a big parcel. It's 23.77 acres
lot
of
of water,
land.
though.
So of course, I haven't seen a survey that identifies the configuration of wetlands and the exact extent of the wetlands. But I imagine that that size building could fit. Warehousing doesn't typically require a huge amount of parking spaces. It will require some. But it is amazing what they could do if they feel that there is sufficient value. If you look at Northborough Crossing, for example, huge retaining walls, I'm sure a huge amount of blasting took place to accommodate that shopping center, and there are many examples. FedEx is another example. So where there's a will, there's a way. I found it.
Okay, I'll just hand them out.
Yeah,
You-
great.
The source is Lee?
Yeah,
you told
so
that?
that's from the assistant assessor. Me.
Looks like you're getting 2 copies, because I cannot pull them apart. If you could do that, you could share that with home.
All right, thank you, Sean, we sure did.
Share some
Sure,
people.
we share paper. What is the assessed value of the land right now?
I believe it's around $1 million.
Well, remember,
Oh,
right
it's
now
on
it's
here.
being taxed at its chapter, its agricultural use.
So it's lower.
So it's not being taxed
Oh,
as
there
an
it is.
industrial use. So if you were to look at the land value for the 40,000 square foot building, it kind of gives you an idea of what it would be
Right.
if it were
I see it, yeah, okay.
used for industrial purposes.
We can send the field guide for this parcel, straight away afterwards.
You will see it's very low because of that 16 acres that's in the 61A program.
Yeah, I remember a resident brought up during the select board meeting, quoted a figure, and then he probably went to the town records, and if you click the property card and you look deep, it states some number, and that was something that came up. I forget the context in which he brought it up. I wanted to come back to the first question that Todd posed to you, Tim, and that was about, could he just sell the other land? The whole nature of the relationship with Anza and that possibility could be a major objection that comes up at town meeting. It's been raised a bit, and, people see some benefit in preserving this land, but others have stated they don't want to give the guy any money. And it would be disastrous if, in fact, the same thing occurs. So do you have any inkling that you could discuss during more negotiations with this owner and/or his counsel to sort of give confidence that that's not going to happen?
No, I mean, I cannot predict or even guess. We can ask and try to have a conversation about what his future plans are for that side. I can tell you that we have a multi-pronged approach in litigation relative to that parcel. there's other controls in place, if you will, that would keep that from being developed inappropriately.
I'm already on record for kind of supporting doing this. I just want to be clear that that's a risk, that
Yeah.
you're
No,
gonna do this, and he's just,
Yeah, I wanted to flush it out a little bit.
I don't think there is anything anybody could do to prevent that.
No, I mean, it's private property, so if he ultimately wants to sell it to somebody who's gonna do something nasty on it, then it's zoned industry.
Yeah,
So, as long as it's an allowed use, then he could,
You're trying to mitigate a second use that'll be more detrimental to the neighborhood or the section of the community. It's weird
Bend it down.
to say that you want to preserve it for open space.
Well, truly, in its simplest form of this question is, if the same type of P&S comes up for 429 after town meeting has approved us buying this one, we'd be back in the same place. The town would anyway. What do we do about that? So it's an interesting proposition. If you believe that, and I have no knowledge of the owner, I'm not in a butter. I know that there's a somewhat adversarial relationship already in court and so on, so I'm not going there, but given all of that, do you have any confidence that, it wouldn't happen right away? So it's a valid question.
Is 429 chapter land, or not?
Some of the acreage.
I'm sorry, what was it?
Is 429 chapter land? So let's say that did happen, would we have right of first refusal again?
I believe that that's also enrolled in the program, yes.
Not all, but most of the acreage.
Interesting.
Mhm.
Okay.
And that has access to the rail as well?
Well, we haven't looked at that
I,
parcel.
you know,
It's next to it.
they said that the spur is on this parcel. Now, I don't know what it takes to get a spur, so maybe it's possible that they could get another spur on the other parcel. But I heard that this parcel is attractive because the spur already exists. Just a matter of using.
It's just simply not good. There's no good solution, but it stems the worst.
I'm willing to move on from the question. I
Yeah,
just thought it was a valid point to bounce around a little bit.
Terrifying point.
Yeah.
One thing that I'm concerned about this parcel as opposed to the other parcel, which also has wetlands on it, so I'm not gonna say it doesn't have wetlands, but the proximity to Barefoot Brook. This parcel and its wetland system is closer to Barefoot Brook than the other parcel and their wetland resources, so that's a concern.
So as you know, I represent the Open Space Committee on this committee, and Open Space Committee has become the sponsor of this new application. So I wanted to share some of the feelings that Open Space Committee members expressed. We had a meeting on Monday, and we had met in December at the time, and that resulted in a letter of support. On Monday, we had another vote and supported a letter of support for this application. And the consensus among the open space members was that very much in favor of buying the property, and that very much in favor that the conservation funds that we have accumulated with CPA money at town meeting, approved at town meeting for open space purchases, should be utilized for this, because that's what we've been saving it for. And so, I agree personally, it's a good point, but it comes with some requirements. As I understand it, if we are to utilize that money for the purchase, we need to identify, somehow map the property so we identify what portion, presuming the majority of it is to be preserved, and establish its value so that we can prove its value is at least as much as the CPA open space money that we would be using. So, round numbers, we have $664 in the conservation fund that was designated by open space, by CPA. And we already voted on a measure to put $350,000 more into the conservation fund. Part of which would come from new revenue and part of which was going to come from the unreserved fund. Further, the Open Space Committee stated that they are willing to, in essence, waive that application so that any combination of new revenue and the conservation funds can be put towards this project. So put that on the table and just think about, we have the 664 in conservation fund, we have the 213, what's that say, 218? 218,000 of the application approval that was going to come from new revenue, and we're up to 880 something. And then the remainder, just kind of think of it in the bucket of the unreserved fund. So we haven't committed that new revenue yet, whereas the 664 we definitely have. So I've asked in email, and I'm bringing it up again tonight, that if that was a path that we took, does the town have the means to dig in and get that assessment done, that appraisal done, I should say, and the appraisal being structured in a way that if we follow the application, we're going to discuss that further, but we're going to try to leave the possibility of some land to be developed for future housing, and, few of us have walked the property, none of us have mapped the property really, so we don't really know yet what we don't know. But would we have the ability to do that in a relatively short amount of time? The appraisal part, I mean.
If that were the will of the CPC, we would definitely
Figure it out.
Work that out.
So I wanted the members to know where we stood on that basically we've been given the flexibility to rescind and repurpose our new revenue if we want, and that Open Space Committee thinks we should use the conservation funds that they essentially sponsored to be put in there in the first place.
So that scenario you're describing, John, would be the one whereby we'd be avoiding issuing debt for the parcel, should that appraisal come back favorable with the value.
We'd be avoiding debt for the 664 portion? Is that what you meant to say? Or?
Correct. I mean, if you're doing that, it would be avoiding some of the debt that were laid out in the final. The second scenario with 30 years of debt.
I'm going to cut to the chase with a personal opinion. I think that the voters might not want to go into debt again from CPA while we're still paying down the whitelist debt, and uncertainty about future revenues will be there and so on. We have the potential for CPA projects in the future. We always do. But there's a part of me that feels like between the conservation fund and the accumulation in the unreserved fund, which has been sort of the result of after state matches, good news, unused administrative fund, good news, and then fortunately or unfortunately, applications we couldn't proceed with or didn't receive for affordable housing from the Housing Authority and obviously the White Coast proposal. So that left our balance above $1 million in the savings account, if you will, as uncommitted. So there's a part of me that thinks we have the savings and it technically could be purchased with those funds. Lori's news that DCR might contribute something just seems like found money to me that, would be a bonus that you don't necessarily expect.
Can I just ask Jason, I know you ran a scenario for a debt service. What is the annual payment on it? $1 million, or is it
expected revenue has pretty much gone up every year, right?
Correct.
Through either.
Is it still 25% from the state match, or is that variable every year?
It's variable, we've averaged some 30-something percent.
Yeah, it varies. I mean, the state has made supplemental appropriations into the trust fund in order to fund higher distributions, but yeah, it's generally about 25%.
So is that one, the 820 include their assessment?
That does include it.
So that 110 isn't it's offset by 30% of whatever you get from the state.
Yeah, the 110 would obviously fulfill whatever CPA, of debt service would fulfill whatever CPA threshold we're required to spend for whichever purpose this fulfills. And it sounds like it's going to be, the majority of which is going to be open space. So, again, like the burden on the, on the fund would be about $121,000 for the first few years of the debt as it begins to decline for, if you issued 30 years of debt. I hope that answers.
Well, we could run it
the
at 20,
question.
25.
Correct, yeah.
I know assessments aren't the same as appraisals, to change back to the first point. Lee, when I'm a big fan of figuring out what the taxes could be, like on this sheet here. But I also have some developable land per acre cost for Northborough between $275 and $325. So just the simple math on the 27 acres, it's $75,000 an acre. So I can say in 99% confidence that you're gonna reach the threshold for the valuation component. We just have to either rely on the assessment piece or get an appraiser to tell us that.
Yeah, I agree with you. It was more the timeframe and the mechanism.
Yeah.
We have to get an appraiser involved, there's some cost in that. We have historically funded that with our admin fund, which is applicable in this case, since we have we have business, we have a project. We've gone over this question a couple times, and what can we use the admin fund for? And the simple definition from our guide at the Coalition Steward is, make sure it's the business of your committee and you're not taking outside requests. So our business in this case is, how do we get the information we need to bring the application to town meeting, should we decide to do so?
Yeah, obviously we'd look into the vendors that we've worked with in the past for appraisals and for this purpose.
Do you think it's reasonable that something could be done in a month's time or something,
Yeah.
in your experience?
Yes. I
John?
think it's reasonable.
So, I want to open it up to everybody else. Please start kicking in your own 2 cents.
So if the no debt option, so to speak, would use all of our unallocated reserves that we've built up for the last few years,
Well,
pretty much.
really, if you look at the numbers in whole, as I mentioned, 664 in the conservation fund, 218 of new revenue that we were going to use for the conservation fund.
Right.
And then you have $1,060,000 in the unreserved fund. So we have, you'd have a balance of north of 200,000 left over.
Okay.
And that would be your new unreserved fund, if you will.
So the scenario John's talking about is just about trading $200,000 from the conservation fund, which I didn't include in this scenario. The scenario here left about $200,000 in the conservation fund versus leaving it in the unreserved fund. So we're getting to the same total just from.
You get there the same way, yeah.
Yep.
We could make a case to keep the balance in the conservation fund. I will say that, as I said, Open Space has sponsored the conservation fund amounts. Conservation Commission has, bought into that. Conservation Commission submitted a letter of support. And as I say, the Open Space members were, no one said, we should leave a little bit in there. They're kind of like, we've saved for this.
Right.
This is a viable piece. It meets as good a criteria as several others that we have spent conservation fund money on. So And there's a confidence that the town has an appetite to replenish it in the future. So, nobody was afraid to spend what had been saved, if you will.
Right. I'm personally supportive of doing this for open space. I'm concerned having no reserves at all for affordable housing going forward, since there are some big projects coming forward. So that's my only reservation.
I think it's valid, except it's kind of like, why bother borrowing, bonding against
Right.
the savings, we'll call it, $1 million, if you have it now, when you know you can do it as a future mechanism for another project.
Right.
So if the affordable housing project was to come before us, and we don't have enough new revenue, we could bond for it.
Mhm.
It's a certain part of me that almost think that's more logical.
Right.
You're building a house, so to speak. So, and as the first thing I said, we've been going to town meeting now 6 years, 7 years, getting them to vote for the bond payment, on White Cliffs, and there's always open questions about where do we go with White Cliffs. It's unknown yet.
Mm.
Making slow progress towards a process to get more definition around what that might mean. I just feel like it's 1 or 2 or 3 years ahead, where we might be asked to, what more CPA money could go toward that. We know that, but there's many other things that have to be dealt with before we get to that point, so. This project is in front of us now,
Right.
you know what I mean?
Yep.
But I share your concern.
Yeah, I'm in favor of not borrowing either. I mean, I feel like we're being forced to do this. It isn't like a fun thing. I don't really want us to have to vote on this for the next 10 years as like a reminder of this exercise. So,
Yeah, it's kind of to my same point.
yeah.
Because then, next town meeting, we'd be presenting 2 things that we're paying a bond on. I just sort of don't want to overuse the mechanism, but we didn't have to.
And I agree, if there's an affordable housing project, we should bond that, because that is a good thing, and we would look forward to that.
Right. I think we got to keep remembering that the new revenue FY '26 is likely to be just as high. We're not sitting on any other big potential application or phase 2 of any other program that we have to pay into, right? So we come back, in theory, we'd have that same 800. We'd have a minimum bond payment again on White Cliffs, something less, 150, let's just say. And then we'd have to deal with our 10% minimums, but we'd have a lot of new revenue to work with.
We have 2 more years on White Cliffs.
There's 2 after this town meeting, I believe, if I got that right.
Yeah, 2 after this one.
So is it safe to say we're looking at this now as strictly open space? Because clearly
28
housing
is
is,
the last year. July 28.
No.
they don't seem to be in approval, so.
No, but I'm gonna, and Rick, you can pick it if you want, but this is what I understand the position of the NAHC and the Housing Authority backing them. There's a reserve of $279,000 in the CPA account. At one time, we were talking about, at last meeting, we were talking in broad strokes.
Yep.
Might there be the potential to put some affordable housing here? Correct me if I'm wrong, but the NHC and the Housing Authority are never not in favor of a program to increase affordable housing. But they believe the best use of the reserves is on the potential for shorter-term things that are more, potentially in the bag. Another Boundary Street property that Rick's spoken of before. And then they had notified us by the email today, they think next year's CPA cycle, they may come back and try to expand it Village Drive again.
Yeah.
So that they're only stating that they would rather that resource, be maintained, and I think that's clear. And in addition, they would rather we don't backtrack on our previous vote to provide money to the NAHC in reserve, if you will, under town agreement, increasing NAHC's resources for exactly the same reasons.
True.
Fair enough? So, having said that, the way the application reads is still that there's the potential to put some housing someday on a part of this land that and if we could do it, and by the way, I forgot to mention that open space and their support, and in the letter that I think Vinnie authored, wants to make clear that if some portion was carved out for housing, be it short-term or long-term, that it does not impact in any way the protection purposes of the land and the connectivity opportunity, trails opportunity. You know, you wouldn't want to put the housing development right down in front of the wetlands or something, you know.
Yeah.
So, should that be possible, then that's fine. Is that?
Yeah, I just get the sense it seems to be more of an open space project, and I'm fine with that too, I think that.
It is clearly, you know, I mean, it's 20 acres of it, let's just say, are gonna be at least open space. This is the kind of the gray area that we're in, and we haven't had time to define it and map it, but
Right.
we're making in the application, Lori's making an assumption, 4 to 8 units, it's a smallish building, it's, you know, it's not that many acres. And could that be positioned in a way that leaves all the open space benefits intact?
I guess in a way too, does that bind us to ultimately putting housing here instead of using the housing resources somewhere else? Or is it just an option?
It
Well,
would,
can I speak to that?
Yeah, sure.
That speaks to the concern I think we have,
Yeah.
that the potential here is to use a certain amount of community preservation, affordable housing money for the acquisition of this property, and that affordable housing never gets built. Either because a project doesn't present itself, or when a project does present itself, either through the necessary permitting that have to happen through the land use boards, or through community objection to developing open space housing, that the funding doesn't become provided in the future to provide the actual building of the housing. So when we thought about that, and we got some information from the Community Preservation Coalition that John got through Stewart, was sent back to us, that in those instances when there were successful multiple-use projects where some open space money was used and some affordable housing money was used, the projects were successful either when the affordable housing project was developed and presented as part of the proposal at the beginning, where it was clear how many units were going to be built, where they were going to be sited, and how much they were going to cost. And when the proposal went for approval, it was approved as both a defined affordable housing project and an open space preservation. Everybody knew where on the parcel the open space was going to be, where the affordable housing was going to be, how much money was going to cost to build the housing, and how much was going to cost to preserve the land. There was an example of a project that was successful that way. There was another successful project where unreserved community preservation funds were used to acquire the property. Then after the fact, the proper people got together, divided up the land, and then presented a proposal as to how much was going to be open space and how much was going to be affordable housing. There were instances, though, like we're talking about here, where there was some future undefined affordable housing use mentioned, and housing was never built. And so, in fact, the affordable housing money went to preserve open space. And if, in fact, this land is acquired using affordable housing money, and it eventually, at the beginning, looks like one big open space project, my sense is that a combination of the current feeling in the town, which is not all in favor of affordable housing development, and is in favor of open space preservation, that there's a possibility that people will say, why are we building affordable housing on this open space? Even though we may have defined when this goes before a town meeting this year, that some open space money is being used, there really isn't a guarantee that the open space will be developed. In the meantime, the Housing Corporation is sitting on the evaluation of two fairly significant projects for which we'll probably make application for one or both this fall to this committee, to build affordable housing that we know what it's gonna look like and where it's gonna be and when it's gonna be done. And so, if in fact the affordable housing money, some of the affordable housing money we have is not reserved and is spent on this project, we're gonna come back and be looking for more. Right now, there's about $360,000 in funds reserved for NHC. And there's a warrant article that we appreciate you're gonna present that's gonna increase that to $500,000. That $500,000 won't be sufficient to support probably the Boundary Street project with Habitat, and certainly not sufficient to support the Housing Authority project. So we'll be looking for money in excess of that. And if the answer is, well, then we can bond that, my concern is, once again, with the short-term feeling in town, not completely in favor of affordable housing, that there might be more appetite to bond an open space acquisition than there might be to bond an affordable housing acquisition. And so we could discover that, in fact, the affordable housing projects can't fly because the bonding issue of that, may not make it as easily as a bonding issue on open space. So there's a lot of different, and a lot of this comes back to just the fact that our experience has been, with the White Cliffs being a good example, that there doesn't seem to be a lot of support in town right now for development of affordable housing. And if we can do small projects, 1 or 2 units here or there, and work with the CPC and the select board to use the money that's reserved on our behalf, we've been successful. But there's a concern about going to town meeting on a large affordable housing project without sufficient funding and getting that approved. So these are kind of all the things that came up in discussion at the Housing Corporation.
You're speculating a bunch, no disrespect, but I don't want to over-speculate. And I want to use the example you just gave, where you say the Community Preservation Coalition had a couple examples of projects, one of which you said, your words were, they used unreserved funds, and then they got together after and decided for sure, this is what we're going to do. I don't see much difference in the potential here that significant of our unreserved funds are used for the purchase, and we're outlining within it that we have a desire that a small portion could be used for a small affordable housing project. You just stated the obvious, that we've been successful in town getting the small stuff approved. Unfortunately, the bigger stuff not yet, but so this seems to be of that scale of the smaller things that are doable. And I know that you want to make sure you beat the drum loud enough that don't take the affordable housing reserve. And that point is clear and I think valid. And please don't backtrack on your commitment to the NHC. And I think that point's valid. So beyond those two things, I think you're speaking to the other unreserved funds that, in your mind, thinking that that's a potential pot for the next project. And I don't blame you. That's what you advocate for. But just as we were speaking about before, I don't know that it's valid to say that the town's more willing to borrow for the open space than the affordable housing. I get where you're coming from, but I'm not sure that we should be speculating too much in the future and dealing more with what's here, so.
Well, I think that if in fact the proposal is to use some of the money reserved for open space preservation through what's in the conservation fund and unreserved CPA money to make this acquisition, and if the money that's currently held in the affordable housing reserve, not reserved for NHCs, but just other money that's accumulated over time, is not used towards the purchase of this property, then I think the Housing Corporation supports that 100%. And we'll be back trying to spend, hopefully, the $500,000 that'll be in our reserve. And one thing I just want to be clear on is there's been talk about $279,000 being the additional funds of reserved affordable housing money, not reserved for NHC. But the math that I've done has that number at about $305,000. you know, if in fact, 305,000, because there's some unused money from prior warrant articles that wasn't spent. So the 279, I think, comes from, the last 4 years, the 10% for affordable housing was never allocated. And that adds up to about $279,000. And then there was about another 26 or 27,000 that came from a demolition of the old senior center that wasn't spent, and a little bit less than $1,000 from the project we did on Center Drive that wasn't spent. So I think the number beyond what's reserved for NHC, I think, is 305,000. Not that's a lot more than 279.
Can I speak to that? So the 279,000 that keeps getting brought up, that's what's in the affordable housing reserve, the CPA reserve, that's formally in that fund. There are things that don't come before the committee, that the articles that have already been approved for Affordable Housing Corporation, as well as the one that was for the Housing Authority that was unspent. Those aren't being considered or talked about right now. I know you've brought them up a number of times from what you were talking about, but that's not what the CPC was considering tonight as a funding source for this.
But to the extent that we presented an affordable housing project that needed funding beyond our own NEHC fund, those additional funds would be available to be used with town meeting approval for affordable housing. Right?
The 280,000.
But I thought we discussed in the past, the about 27,000 remaining from the senior center demolition would be
Correct,
available.
that's still reserved within an article. And that is dedicated to affordable housing.
Okay.
But that would have to be
Yeah,
moved.
fair, it's a nuance of what the balance is, not really critical for the discussion.
Right, but
So you're-
we are, I just want to make sure we're talking about the same thing, because there were some ideas that were being thrown around initially when it was talked about this being used for affordable housing or open space, and
Yes.
the $280,000 reserve for 279,860 for reserve was brought up, but then it was dropped relatively quick. It's not suggested in my memo that we would approach that.
Well, that's my main point. That's not,
Yeah,
is that we fully support any decision to acquire this.
Your point is duly noted, and you've articulated it well, and I can't speak for everyone, but I think we get it. And I think we're talking about not touching that reserve, at this point. But the question that keeps coming up, and Stuart Saginaw has tried to define it, but just hypothetically, if the application goes forth as it's written, and we're talking about some portion of the land, it's a small percentage. Let me just say it's 10%, just to put a number out there for purposes of discussion. If it's a $1.7 million purchase, I wonder if we can just say 170,000 of it is going to be called an affordable housing number in terms of what we designate under CPA. We've already we'll already be meeting the minimum by the article we already voted to approve for the NHC's money, right? And so the portion would be coming for sure from the unreserved funds. And in the guidance from Stuart, I think he's saying if you do that, you can make the decision later exactly what the acreage is and how you designate the value. So that the only thing that we're required to do, because we're acquiring the property, is that if the open space conservation fund money is used, we've got to establish that value and just prove that. We don't think it's going to be a problem. That we'll be far above that. So
And I have no problem with using the unreserved money and making a statement as part of the presentation of the article that some of this land could be used for affordable housing in the future, the way it's going to be defined.
Yeah, so let me ask you the question. If the article came up like that, and a small portion, and we agree it's, just 10% or whatever, and we are, as a CPC, we're saying we're designating this to be possibly used for a project. You're always looking for an opportunity for another property, right? So wouldn't you be in favor of that opportunity sitting there as long as it doesn't cut into your other opportunities? We're talking about a piece of the money that's low percentage of the total, I think all I'm hearing you say is, if I had my druthers, I'd leave it in the unreserved fund, because I know when I come back to you next year,
No, that's not what I'm
you'll have
saying.
more to come from?
My only druthers are leaving the 279 alone. I wasn't clear tonight whether that decision had been made or not. If the decision had been made,
Yep.
not to use the 279 to acquire this property,
That point's clear.
and not to use the other warrant article money that's gonna increase our fund to
That point's
500,000.
clear.
I'm all for this. Okay. The thing I was trying to protect was the warrant article and the 279. Beyond that, I know anything else we propose, we're gonna have to decide how we can do it, when we can do it, and where the money is coming from.
Don't get me wrong, you've been doing this for more years than me, and your sense of what might, what obstacle might come up at town meeting is very valuable. You might be right, but I think the way the application's written, and just that there's something about the dual use of it that's attractive to me.
Right.
That it gives a little different value to this piece of land that, it's not the prettiest open space acquisition that we've made, you know? It's got its drawbacks, even though it has its benefits. But the aspect that it has some dual use, I feel like it brings value to it. Now, 5 other members are here. Does anybody see it the opposite or differently?
No, absolutely, I agree wholeheartedly. I agree wholeheartedly.
Another question slightly off. So Jason, in your memo, you say that the majority of the cash needed in the transaction is required in the next fiscal year.
Correct.
And we talked about needing to pay $50,000. But I was just looking at the contract. It says the time of performance is 2 years. Would the intent be to buy it this summer completely?
Yeah, I believe that the majority of what that meant was that we had to come up with $50,000 to match
The contract.
original,
Yep.
for the contract. This fiscal year, within the current, and we would do that after town meeting approved any article that.
And would the balance of the money be paid this year as well? Or would it be
Well,
delayed?
this calendar year, it would be August, I think is when
Okay.
the closing would happen.
Okay.
So that's what I meant. That would open up the possibility of using the next year's revenues in order to fund the purchase.
It's not possible to purchase it, it's the contract, and I haven't read the whole contract, it's kind of long, but it says the time of performance is 2 years, which I'm assuming because they were going to develop it. Am I missing that? I'm
Mr.
sorry.
Chairman, there's 2 things at play. One is the state law requires us to take action.
Yep,
So it supersedes the contract that the buyer and seller have,
okay,
unless we get agreement from the seller
okay.
to extend that duration. But our intent is to close in July, August 1st, whatever
Okay.
that first time frame is.
Thank you.
Just so we can take ownership of it and do the next thing and hopefully get some money back from DCR and so forth.
Okay, thank you.
I have one, you can help me on this. Is there any, I think of affordable housing or low-income housing, is there a sense or a stigma that we just slap a couple units in between a couple factories and people are okay with that? Or do you think it's better to meld it into a neighborhood? In other words, for affordable housing, do you think it just doesn't seem like the great location for it to me if I'm a homeowner? Do you get that sense when you have projects in mind?
There's a couple ways to answer that question. There's a lot of ways to do it. I think
I could be
my
wrong, too.
my sense right now is the preference of most of the people in town is to not build low-income housing in existing neighborhoods, but to put it in an area that's sort of more by itself. So the creation of more affordable housing on existing housing authority property, or what's going on down on Boundary Street, or some of the things like that seem to be more palatable at this time. And so we typically look for parcels that, you know, are reasonably attractive as far as where they're located, but don't necessarily are right in the middle of neighborhoods. My preference would be, the next step would be, as we look at the revitalization of downtown, and we start to look at the possibility of a combination of commercial and retail on lower floors and residential on higher floors of buildings. That would be an excellent opportunity to look at some affordable housing, you know, right in the downtown area, which I think a lot of towns have been successful doing. So in a commercial district like that, a downtown district, it would make sense. Kind of on the outskirts of town would probably make sense also. probably not so much integrating it into existing residential neighborhoods. And once again, I think the White Cliffs situation was pretty clear about, that abutted a fairly established residential neighborhood, and neighbors were completely opposed to having any affordable housing built on the White Cliffs property. And that, among other things, sort of finished that proposal. Anyway, but just to get back to, I would think that, given the fact that unreserved money and open space money is going to be used to acquire the property, it was made clear at town meeting there was the potential in the future to develop some affordable housing on the property, and that was a goal of doing it. That would be helpful, so that in the future, when a project was presented, it just didn't sort of come out of the blue that everybody thought this was going to be 27 acres of open space, and so all of a sudden, we're going to put some housing on it. So I think it'd be good to bring that up, that it has the potential of being a dual-use project.
If that was the case, it needs to be presented correctly, as you just said, to avoid the speculation that, wait a minute, what are you telling us, that you might build out the whole property? I think it is number 1, 2, and 3, it's an open space preservation project, and I think you think you're right, it could stand on those merits alone. If the use of unreserved funds allows us that flexibility, even if we loosely define it, then I don't see much downside to it. That's kind of where my head's at. But,
Yeah, I don't see that either. And that fits one of the examples that Stuart sent us. There was one very successful project that acquired the land exactly that way, with unreserved money, and then figured out where the open space is going and where the affordable house is going after the fact.
I think what I'd like to get more guidance on is if that was the way it was to go, what are our requirements? If town meeting approved it, what are our requirements in CPA world? Do we have to give it a designation? Usually you have to report all of our approved warrants and what category they're in, right? And so we've got to put some definition to it at some point.
Well, we need to report on our 10% threshold being met, and we typically met them every year.
Yeah.
So we don't need to report back what we use the unreserved for in the future.
Really? Okay.
Although Stuart did mention in that email that there was one town that had not decided what the restrictions were on the, they did it that way, they used unreserved money, and he said they were out of conformance with some regulation that so much time had gone by and they still hadn't put the restrictions on the property. So at some point, there's a requirement to do that, but I'm not sure what the time frame is.
Well, when it comes to the open space property, we need to put a conservation restriction on it, and so you'd be required to lay out at that point which acres are we talking about.
Exactly.
And we've met that requirement for all of the land purchases that we've done with CPA money. I guess that would be where where you'd be required to nail it down at that point in time.
Right, because you wouldn't want that on the part that's going to become affordable housing.
Yeah, and I guess it doesn't preclude future people in the future committee saying, gee, we never did anything on those 3 acres. We'll put it into the conservation restriction too,
Sure.
Or, gee, we got these 3 acres and it's still available, should we find a way to build affordable housing on it?
And once again, as long as we just use unreserved money to do that, then it's not a problem. We can do whatever we want. Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
So I just want to make sure I understand, if we do it this way, we do not have access to grant money.
So you would still,
I'm not sure I see an alternative, I just want to make sure I understand
you still have the DCR money.
the 200,000 possible.
So my understanding of how that works is they would come to the closing with the $200,000 check. So it wouldn't be a reimbursement, it would be an outright.
Contribution to the purchase, okay, thanks.
That much less that
Right.
we'd be spending, which would be better
Yeah.
for our reserve.
Yeah.
I think that the mechanics of that too, I think we would know whether this grant award was coming by town meeting time, and that way we could adjust our town meeting article to reflect the balance of the funding. So, I mean, in this memo, I laid out a method to, to no debt to finance 1.7 million, but in this case, obviously, we'd be financing 1.5 million if the state were to kick in $200,000, so we could adjust the article. And again, it would be the purview of the CPC to decide whether that goes back, if we reduce the contribution from conservation or reduce the amount coming from unreserved, I think that would defer to you, but it would be good news.
Lloyd, from what you know of grants available, and if time weren't an object, what potential would there really be for something like this?
So the grants that I would be interested in applying for are the ones that are offered by the Division of Conservation Services. And actually, the grant deadline was just a couple of weeks ago. So we'd have to wait another whole year to apply for that money. And then usually the turnaround time is as much as 6 months before you hear from the date of application to the date of award. So that would delay at least a year.
Why do you think your DCR contact even offered the possibility of that money? Are they sitting on a little
They're
pot or
sitting on a
something?
little pot of money.
And
Yeah.
then,
They have to spread it entirely across the state, so they can't just, it's in the neighborhood of 3 million. And it wouldn't act like a typical grant. So there wouldn't be like a formal application process, and so she would just speak with her board, and then they would vote, and then we would know whether we have the money or not. So that site visit is key.
So it's fair to say that opportunity is much more plausible than grants. I think your question is this opportunity that SCT buys it
Right.
and folds it out, and, which is pretty complicated.
Right.
But if it doesn't, if it's really not netting, if there's not like a humongous
Right.
grant opportunity
Exactly.
for $1 million to each town, and this is more, it's just really interesting that they gave you that answer
And they're interested in holding the CR, you said.
They are.
on top of it.
Yeah. Would they do that for free?
I would think that their contribution would go towards, that would pretty much be paying for the CR.
That'll help, because CRs are expensive, aren't they? Usually like 100,000 at least.
That's more the commitment for stewardship,
Okay.
which if you're SVT, no disrespect to them, but they make a case for what it costs for the stewardship.
Right.
And then if you're DCR, then your taxes are paying them, so
Already.
maybe it's better to look at.
Well, they also have a vested interest, because remember, they own the abutting parcel to
Right.
the south.
Yeah, right.
So they want, I think that they were very concerned about what this parcel could be and how that would impact the land that they own and the quality of the water.
That's great. 200,000 is a nice chunk.
Okay, well, members, anybody got any input on the process, the mechanism that we should or shouldn't propose? By the way, Todd, before I let you go.
I get to go?
No. Before I let you- I have to
the
say,
hook.
before I let you speak,
No.
not that you were gonna speak, but you represent the Conservation Commission on this board. Can you speak to their support for using the con fund money? In essence, our process in town is that Concom and Open Space both sign off.
I mean, they voted unanimously to proceed to recommend purchasing it, so I can't imagine they wouldn't then also recommend to use the money.
Thank you. I'll put that on the record. And clarify one more thing, I think you said it already. In theory, we can use some new revenue because we're gonna close, you could postpone the closing till July 1, so it will be available. So once again, the, open space folks were like, no, by all means, think of the previous application amount, the $350, think of that as going toward this, not separate from it. So we would have to move to remove support for that application and apply it to this one.
I happen to have the figures, if you're interested, that you've been discussing. So
Will
it'd
be.
be, if you want me to say them.
One moment. Millie, got any words of wisdom?
No, it's just a lot to take in, and I think there's a lot of things to consider, so, just wanna make sure we have all the information we need to make sure that we are fairly dispersing the funds.
From a, planning board perspective, do you think it aligns with
Master plan?
town goals and so on?
Yeah, I do, definitely do. Yeah, I mean, I would love to see the affordable housing parts of it come in, as well as, so maybe the mixed use, is that mixed funding? But obviously don't wanna take away from projects that we already have approved. But I also feel that, if we had to bond something, it's easier to do that and vote for that specifically than it is to say, well, we don't know what we're gonna be voting for and then have it switch. I think that was an issue with what happened with White Cliffs, is that it was voted for by the town, but under historical and cultural, and then, the affordable housing part of it that was proposed was a bit of a shift in what people felt, so.
That's fair.
Yeah, and what they paid for, so whether you wanted it or not, I felt that they might have thought, well, we didn't vote for that. But I think
Right.
voting for affordable housing mixed would be very approachable.
That's fair, and, the opportunity at White Cliffs came up in a similar
Yep.
emergency fashion.
Yep,
And,
1,000%, yeah.
We went to town meeting speaking that we didn't know all the answers. But the passion of people to preserve it was what won the day at that time, so.
Yep.
That's still there, and I'm sure that the town will manage it somehow. But it kind of comes back to what I was speaking about earlier, is, I feel like because we have the reserves we have and resources we've been diligent about saving up, that you act on what's in front of you, knowing that we have the same mechanisms and flexibility next year, the year after, and the year after.
Mhm.
Because Northborough's lucky to have CPA, so kind of how I feel about it.
I have a little concern on most of our tax revenue comes from homeowners, and we always think of ways of increasing commercial development to ease that burden. I think it's, over 80% of our money comes strictly from homeowners?
Is that accurate?
More like 73.
Yeah.
Pretty
So
much, yeah.
I'm trying to think how this looks at town meeting, that we're taking industrial land off the rolls. And then Stuart Saginaw said there's some state pushback on communities that in effect do that, take viable land off and just say that just because it's almost a form of snob zoning, if you will, for
Did he
land.
imply,
It isn't, in my mind, it isn't, but it can be viewed that way.
Did he imply CPA advocates for pushing back, or that?
No, I think he indicated the problem with the state, and we've alluded to with affordable housing, everyone wants it, but nobody really wants it. They like it in Hubbardston or.
Yeah.
And it's, I think it should be integrated neighborhood by neighborhood, but I'm just, the presentation I'm viewing at town meeting, I think this creates a problem.
It's not, we have a 100% success record.
Oh, yeah.
And it's not without risk, this one,
Yeah,
for something like that, or, any number of citizens could object to the cost of it,
yeah.
It's an expensive thing that doesn't seem like the right number to me, but we're forced to match the bona fide offer.
And then,
So it is what it is right now.
when Todd brought it up, to me, that's a ticking time bomb, when you
Wow.
couple the seller with his past activities, and no real answer to that, other than
Yeah, I think if we were to vote to bring it forward, we have to commit to some preparation too, to
Yeah.
be able to define the article correctly, answer some of those questions,
Yeah.
and be able to support what,
But I have no qualms bringing it to town meeting.
You know,
I think it's worth doing.
Right.
Worth trying.
Yes. I just think there's some difficulties too.
You're absolutely right.
Just to kind of counter your point. So right now, this is industrially zoned land. So by including the affordable housing component, then you are still allowing some development, albeit limited. So there is some value, there will be some tax revenue. Chances are, you know, these will be townhouses. Of course, they will be restricted, so won't get as much tax revenue as you would from market rate housing, certainly. But I think the state would not necessarily view it as a loss, because they are pushing and pushing and pushing and pushing for affordable housing. So you're taking it out of industry, but you're putting it in the affordable housing pot.
But I think we know, especially hearing Rick, that the affordable housing development there is probably a long way off.
Yeah, but
It could be. But,
so
you know,
was
every
every
single.
other project, you know, I mean, when was NAHC reformed? Rick, when was NAHC formed?
2008.
Yeah, so in 15 years, you know, you've been successful, but in small chunks, that
Yeah.
each one took several years,
Yeah.
you know? And they're all good chunks, they just, right?
Yeah.
It's a-
We're
Takes
setting
some
up the
process.
project for year 6, or year 7 for them.
Would it be possible to get the numbers, so to your question, you said 73% right now comes from homeowners.
Yeah, off the top of my head.
So we're talking about lost revenue. Is it possible to run the numbers that if this, like what the difference is, if this were developed industrial,
That's,
would
Yeah,
it,
that-
would it reduce it to 53%? No, of course not. Would it reduce it to 72%, which is, you know, negligible? Is it possible to run those numbers to sort of proactively
Yeah, we could run the exact.
be armed with that?
I mean, like John said,
The average
we need to
tax
do
bill-
some presentation
Yeah.
work,
Just the average tax
Yeah.
bill
that's for sure.
times 4 units.
See, that's about right, because
yeah.
we're talking, in the big picture, is it really?
Right, that's- I
And
suspect-
to Lori's point, I mean, I'm throwing out round numbers, instead of 80,000 a year from the warehouse with the rail spur, it might get 10,000 a year back with property owners,
Yeah.
you know?
I think it's worth.
Bit of a stretch, but that's what you're talking about, right?
So
Like I said, we'll have to work on the presentation.
Question rather than
Not a full-
we can speculate if it's not too much, don't do that.
Hey, I'm not sure, I put up a slide that articulates this, but you want to be ready to answer the question. Right? It's all on you.
And it doesn't affect the abutting property values.
And to the point of if
I don't have the answer, John, I'll tell you that right now.
So you're not volunteering to take the presentation.
not with yours, track
Oh,
right.
yeah.
I'm not messing with that.
You're a victim of your own success.
Yeah,
I tried that a
very
couple
much.
times, you know.
Yeah.
You do not want
I
me to
got
go
like
there.
blank stares. You want us to talk in front of town meeting?
You've seen me in front. It's not a pretty picture. To the point about if we didn't do this, if we purchase this property and the industrial development ends up across the street, I mean, that still could happen even if we,
Yeah.
even if this doesn't go through, you could end up with industrial on both sides of the street, so it's
We're
not,
gonna have to
it's
answer
not one
that
side or the
together.
other. The risk is there no matter what.
Could we have what happens across the street come to this side of the street?
You could, I mean, we're definitely preventing that, right?
Yeah. That would be a selling point right there.
So there you go.
Many ways, many angles. I'd like to move to question, or move to move. We ready to?
In a nutshell, do we have the funds available to do it without debt?
Sounds like it, yeah, and without touching the affordable housing reserve too.
Lori was about to read off some numbers.
So if you're interested in using the full conservation fund amount, that's $664,073. The new revenue that was voted at the last meeting For the conservation fund,
$350.
that amount was $218,274, for a total of $882,347. So that leaves a shortfall of $817,653. And there is more than that in the unreserved funds.
Plus the 350,000.
No, so, the 218,274 is
Yeah.
the portion of the 350 that we voted from new revenue.
Right.
So that, as I stated already, Open Space Committee gives that up, puts the 218 of new revenue toward
Oh, I see, okay.
the
Toward that,
664.
okay.
Just keeping the,
So that 218 comes out of the
Yeah.
350?
yeah,
Okay.
so, in other words, if one was making a motion for a warrant, you put that number for new revenue. And we don't have, the 664,073?
It's 073, yep.
Yeah, that, it's not coming out of it's not coming out of any of the CPA categories or the unreserved fund or the new revenue, but we're, voting to utilize it. And then you gave, what's the total again, I'm sorry, 8?
The total of the conservation fund and the new revenue, $882,347. So the shortfall, once again, is $817,653. So if
And the
DCR
sort-
comes up with the 200 grand, then that would be reduced by 200,000.
So the source for it, if we took that from the unreserved account, we'd be left with 243 something.
And maybe-
Still in the
and maybe-
unreserved fund.
And maybe 400 if we get the, what's your confidence level, do you think, on DCR?
She seemed intrigued and absolutely willing to partner with the town.
Do you think it helps?
And they were eager to do the site
Yeah,
visit,
If you were
so.
to go back to her and say that it helps the town, is willing to put all of its chips, so to speak, as well, if that would help. That's very interesting.
Would that be a maximum that they would?
She was
continue?
kind of throwing it out from the top of her head.
Oh,
I was tempted to be like, hey, if you'd be willing to do that, would you be willing to do 350,000? But then I didn't want to push my luck, so.
yeah.
We can always have that conversation during the site walk.
Well, we're just gonna be a couple $100,000 short.
Okay, well,
If I knew how to make the motion, I would do
yeah,
it.
there would need to be, the first motion, if one was to approach a motion for the purchase, the first motion would be to reverse the vote on the open space application for the conservation fund money.
So moved.
Second.
Very well, so what's on the table is to reverse the vote we took on January 4th for the application of the $350,000 that was gonna go to the conservation fund. We're implying the purpose is to use it for this other land purchase. Do we have any other questions on that motion? All in favor?
Aye.
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 We are
Aye.
so unanimous. So now we got more money, so to speak.
John, where would the 664,073 be coming from? Is that conservation reserve?
It's conservation fund.
So, I make a motion that we
The next number is the new revenue, the 218 number.
move, that we, approve this application for the purchase of 432 Whitney Street land acquisition using $664,073 for conservation reserve, $218,274 from new money, and then $817,653 from the unreserved account.
Second.
Motion by Jeff, second by Leslie. great, thank you. Any questions, more discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
We are 6-0 unanimous.
Thank you for your support.
Thank you.
You're welcome, I think it was a great discussion. Now, you have, the other agenda item is with regard to using admin funds for things that would go to this purchase. And my biggest questions are on the legal expenses. I kind of didn't expect that, but I guess you gotta pay the council for something. So it's their cost for anything they do with regard to the PNS or rewriting the PNS for the town of Northborough.
And the title search, that's the biggest bulk of the cost, is the title. Their title for us to take is the critical piece.
And is the buyer actually required to bear all that compared to the seller?
The seller has to provide clear title, so if there's clouds on it, he's gotta pay money to remove those. But yeah, that's what her estimate is. We'll work hard to keep it as low as possible.
Jason, do you know what our admin fund balance is from '24?
I think we hadn't spent very much of it so far.
I think we have like 35,000 left. So
Yeah,
we
that's
ended up
30.
paying the annual charge to the coalition.
And you pay some staff, traditionally some staff reimbursement comes from that for, which is Michelle, will remember for minutes and
Yeah,
stuff.
we haven't been whacking that for Michelle, because she's, already being paid out of the planning budget.
Well, then we appreciate your effort.
Yeah,
So we have 35-ish. So this is affordable, but we're talking about needing an appraisal, 5 to 10? somewhere in there?
Let's say probably maybe 5. It's been super expensive.
So we're right at, this is, 25,550 request, so we'd be, maybe we got another 10 there, so sounds like we could cover it. Is there any other expenses that are gonna come up and bite us?
I tried to anticipate everyone. I wasn't aware of the appraisal part of it, so that was new with right now.
With the way we voted to use open space money that just happens to be in the conservation fund, but it was voted as open space money. We need to prove that it's worth at least 664. Sounds easy from what you said, but
So Lori, here in your potential funding sources, you indicated the municipality might have some money, overlay or ARPA. Given that we've just a lot going for $1 million, couldn't the town pick up the difference? Or is there an avenue available?
I would need town meeting approval for most of those on that.
Yeah.
The overlay was just released from the assessors, which we can apply at town meeting.
And could ARPA funds be appropriated without town meeting approval?
Yeah, I could make the application to the board.
That this is a use that could be covered?
Yes. But that would be a week. To put, they meet on the 13th. They might be willing to meet ahead of that, but
Oh, I'm just checking it out.
kind of,
No, I didn't know if we always,
barn doors open,
no, do we need some,
doors left.
do we need something in our administrative fund for some of our business that may come up?
Surprise, yeah. That would be the reason to go after it.
Yeah.
Okay, so should we say that 25,550 is the request right now for admin fund?
Is there any chance you can boost that up, pay an extra $5,000 for an appraisal? Just so I don't have to come back to you.
You're practicing for your talk to DCR?
That's what I hear. That's what I hear. So we would go with the lowest, get 3 quotes and then go with whoever the lowest quote is.
Why don't we, if it was 5,000, maybe 30,550, why don't we just make it 31,000? You think that's a safe appraisal number?
If there's a shortfall, I'll let you know.
We'll come back.
Anyone have an opinion on that?
I'll make a motion that we allocate $31,000 from our admin funds for appraisal, legal, and soil testing.
Well done.
Second by Leslie again. Part of your team? All in favor?
Aye.
Spending money like it's going out of style.
It's fun to spend other people's money.
You know what?
It's fun to spend other
It's
people's.
still taxpayers' money, but gets a 30%
It's amazing.
return on investment every year. So it's state money, fund too.
Absolutely.
It does not restrict any other resources the town needs to do its business, so it's a good thing. Does anybody have any other comments or new business on these subjects? I think we need to put a date out there in case something comes up, we need to meet again.
Do the same thing, keep the meeting open.
Keep the open hearing open
Yeah.
as well. And if we do that, then we definitely got a meeting in, so. Does that sound like the right thing, Lori? The first Thursday is March 7th. Can we put that on the calendar? Thank you, guys.
Thank
Good
you.
meeting. Scott? We should vote on that.
Do we want to do the minutes at all?
Oh, yeah, we do this.
Because I only
How
have
could
one
I-
small change.
I gotta leave that out. I thought that was the first item on the agenda. It's only skipped over. How do you do that?
You're busy.
I had an amendment to the minutes that I gave to Michelle late,
Yeah, I didn't get one either.
and it was with regard to the description of the affordable housing discussion. So top of page 2, she said reauthorizing 2015, 16, 17, 18, 19 funds, but it was actually 16, 17, 18, 19 only, and that was clarified in the motion later in the minutes, so.
Oh,
To cross that out, and then the next sentence was misleading to me, so it said there would be a new round of funding, and I think it needs to say the current application is for a new round of funding of the 126,855, subject to the funding agreement. So I put that in, I think it more accurately clarifies what was being discussed.
makes sense.
Any other changes to the minutes?
I only had that on the First Parish Church. There was no record of a roll call vote or a vote outcome. You know, roll call was taken and it was approved. There's no record of what actually said.
She has it in,
I believe it was all were in favor, I think we were all unanimous.
bottom of page 2, you mean, at the bottom of page 2, second paragraph from the bottom, First Parish Church, Ms. Milton made a motion, Mr. Durkin second, oh, I see. It doesn't say all were in favor.
Yeah, it doesn't say anything about the vote itself.
And we were all in favor.
Yeah.
Yeah, 9-0.
Mhm.
So that should be added, you're absolutely right.
That was it.
Roll call vote followed, all were in favor, add
Yep.
those words, right?
Yep.
Thank you, okay.
Move to accept the minutes as amended.
Second.
Come on, let's do that. Make it up for you.
Set you up there.
Don't want to be greedy.
All in favor of the minutes?
Aye.
So moved, 6-0 on everything.
Move to continue to March 7th?
Second.
Second. Third.
All in favor?
Move to adjourn.
Thank you, so,
Second.
Second.
all in
Third.
favor. So we are adjourned, but our open hearing remains open until March 7th. Thank you, everyone, for your input.
Thank you.